So over the last 15 years or so, I've had the honestly mixed blessing of interviewing and bringing on, hundreds of interns into my program at University Growth Fund, where we teach students how to do venture capital investing. And as part of that, I've had to review literally thousands of resumes on the front end. And then on back end, once students are in our program, I've helped hundreds of them land jobs at some of the best private equity and venture funds in the country. But the place where most of my students go, more than any other particular industry, is investment banking. And so I feel like I've gotten a lot of exposure to the things that the investment banking recruiters really care about and look for. And so I thought it might be helpful for those of you that are thinking about pursuing a job in investment banking to get my thoughts on the things that I would focus on your resume. The first question I think that is important to think about when you're thinking about what do you put on your resume and where do you put emphasis and so forth, is to be putting yourself in the shoes of the recruiter and or the rest of the team that's ultimately going to make that hiring decision. What are the things that they really care about? Well, if you're an undergrad and you're trying to get your foot in the door, or you're coming off of an MBA program and looking to transition to investment banking, you got to think through what are they actually hiring that role for. First, you have to understand what an investment bank does. Well, an investment bank is basically in my opinion, they're kind of like real estate agents, but for companies. So they help companies raise money, they help sell companies, they help buy companies. They do a lot of those similar activities to what a realtor would do when you're looking to buy a house or sell a house or refinance a house or what have you. That's what investment bankers do. And as part of that, you have this multi-tiered structure. Well, you have the managing director at the top, and the managing director's job is basically to go out, kiss babies and shake hands, right? They're out there meeting with clients, meeting with capital providers, meeting with potential acquirers or sellers of businesses, right? They're out glad handling, basically. And then they have a team underneath them of vice presidents and associates and analysts that do all of the legwork to support everything that they're doing face-to-face with the client. And so as you can imagine, everything flows downstream in terms of the crappy work goes straight to the bottom. They're looking for people that can kind of grind and get a lot of the work done that supports all of the other stuff that they're trying to accomplish. So for example, if I'm trying to buy a business, one of the things I'm going to need to do is I need to know if the valuation is good for the business that I'm buying, and that requires a decent amount of research and analysis. And so they'll have people on their team like analysts and associates whose job is to go out and do the research, collect it all, consolidate it all, and then put it in the deck and tell the story. That flows up, the ranks. Everybody gives feedback, comments to make sure it's buttoned up and perfect so it looks good in front of the client, and then it gets shipped out. And so if that's really what your job is all about, then you need to be thinking about how do I demonstrate that I am the right person to hire for that role. And in my opinion, it really boils down to three core things. They are looking for people that are really smart, people with strong financial acumen, and people that have a passion for business and investments and all the things that investment bankers do. So let's dive into each one of these one at a time. So the first one is people that are really smart. If you think about it on its face, investment bankers, kind of like management consultants, are basically hiring brains. They're then marking up those brains and selling them off to their clients in a way, right? So they're looking for people that can get up the learning curve very quickly, because typically these roles, you're only in the role for 1 to 2 years before you're gone. So they don't have a ton of time to hold your hand. Although they do have great training programs, they want you to be able to get up the learning curve quick. So how do you demonstrate that? How do you demonstrate that you are smart? Well, the first one is if you've got good grades, that should be at the top and highlighted as much as possible. If you were Dean's List, if you had honors and accomplishments that were related to school. So for example, maybe you won certain case competitions, or you were selected by your professor to be his teaching assistant, or you received a specific scholarship for academic excellence. All of those things should be in your resume and near the top to really indicate hey, look, I am a smart, hardworking individual. The next piece, though, that I would add is strong financial acumen. Because again, they're not going to spend a ton of time holding your hand on these sort of things. They want you to already get it. So this is particularly relevant if you don't come from a finance background and you're really approaching this maybe from engineering or for something in like the social sciences. You are at a little bit of a disadvantage relative to your finance friends in that you haven't received that same education. And investment bankers aren't going to give you that big of a break. So you need to go and learn all the financial skills that you might have missed out on by not taking those courses. And there are a lot of great resources out there that teach you how to do financial modeling and basic accounting, and so I highly recommend you look into one of the various programs that are out there. That said, a lot of the investment banking interview questions are going to be what we call technical questions, right? They're going to ask you about, walk me through an income statement, walk me through a statement of cash flows, walk me through a DCF, walk me through an M&A model, walk me through a leveraged buyout model. And if you don't know what those things are, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage. But they're not even going to interview you unless they feel like you have a high degree of likelihood of being able to answer those questions. And so in that case, what you want to do is you want to highlight your financial acumen however you can. Now, the best way to do that is through high finance related internships and jobs you might have had. That will be like the number one, right? That's going to do two things for you. One, it's going to indicate to the recruiter like, hey, this is somebody smart because somebody else went through the trouble of hiring them and that was a competitive job to get and they got it. So that's one. So they must be smart. And two, the other thing is it will indicate that like you have some experience doing financial modeling and working in finance. And three, I know I said two, but there is a little bit of a third one, and that is it demonstrates that you are actually passionate about the space, which is my third bullet point. Just to wrap up though, if you don't have a ton of finance experience, go do those courses, get the certificates that they offer, put those on your resume, talk about them as things that you've done, indicate, classes you've taken, capstone projects you've worked on, whatever you can to indicate that, hey, yeah, I'm passionate about finance. And even though I was an econ major, let's say, I took the time to learn all the things that I need to know to create a foundation around finance. The next one that you need to be able to demonstrate is a passion for investment banking. And ideally, it could also be a passion for, anything high finance, so hedge funds, private equity, etc. The best way to do that is through the experiences that you've had. Even if like the best you can do is like get a job at like a wealth management firm, that's going to be better than flipping burgers and will indicate to the interviewer that like, hey, this is somebody that's actually really passionate and doing everything they can to get into this industry. And, in my opinion, like grit and ambition and desire far outweigh like experiences that were spoon-fed to somebody, but it's up to you to be able to demonstrate like that passion through your resume and the things you've accomplished. Oftentimes I think a lot of people when they do internships, they just kind of show up and expect to be spoon-fed. And I think the people that like really get the most out of the internship, build the deepest relationships, and then ultimately have the most to talk about on both their resume and in interviews are those that like go above and beyond. They find ways to add value to the partners, even and their bosses, even if it's like ultimately not a place they want to be. So like maybe, you don't really want to do wealth management, but you see it as like, hey, this is the opportunity I have in front of me. I'm going to go make the most of it. And doing everything you can to drive a ton of value to your boss, that will then open up doors because it will give you interesting things to talk about in an interview. And you never know who your boss or your colleagues might know that could be helpful in terms of making introductions and helping you land that dream job you really want. So what does that mean in terms of your resume and how you indicate that? Well, of course, like put those experiences on there, indicate like accomplishments that you had while you were at those experiences that really showed that you went above and beyond as much as possible. And then, everything else on your resume should be kind of like reflective of that. I mean, even if you were flipping burgers, one, demonstrate that you were the best dang burger flipper out there. But the other thing you could do is, I had one of my students, he worked at Jimmy John's and he was making sandwiches. And what he did that I thought was really smart on his resume is he talked about, he tailored it to a finance perspective. He's like, when I worked there, I worked my way up to like assistant manager. I analyzed the full process and flow and the cost structure of our business and realized that like we weren't doing very well, and implemented a number of cost saving methodologies as well as like motivational strategies for the employees. And we ended up turning the business around and generating, profits. But he included a lot more, financial terminology through all of that, which was really interesting because it took something that would be otherwise viewed as like a throwaway experience. Like, okay, great, you made sandwiches because, you needed money, not because you were passionate about sandwiches. And he turned it into like, hey, yeah, I made sandwiches because I needed money, but I can demonstrate to you that I'm passionate about investing and business by the things that I did there and the way that I framed it. Anyways, hopefully this is helpful to you. Remember, the number one thing that a resume has to do for you is get you the job. So make sure that you're thinking about, how do I make myself the most impressive and align with what these people are really trying to hire for, which in the case of investment banking is they're looking for people that are really smart, that can work really hard, that are going to be excited about the job as much as possible, so that they can give them a bunch of work and work them hard, because it's not an easy job, right? You're working 80 to 120 hour weeks with not a lot of pats on the back. But the flip side is that working in investment banking can tee you up for an amazing career throughout your life, because so many people see it as a great first step in your career, where somebody else, like a top tier investment bank, has vetted you, and then you've gone through the gauntlet and survived, which means you can survive most things. Hopefully this was a helpful video for those of you that are preparing your resumes for investment banking, and even those that aren't. Hopefully you heard some tidbits that were helpful in your own resume prep. If it was helpful, be sure to check out some of my other videos, like where I do an in-depth review of somebody's resume that just applied to a venture fund. Thanks for joining.